This podcast episode reflects the opinions of the hosts and guests and not of Greenberg Traurig LLP. This episode is presented for informational purposes only, and it is not intended to be construed or used as general legal advice nor a solicitation of any type.
My name is Shomari Wade, a government contract shareholder based in Greenberg Traurig's Washington, D.C. office. Welcome to the latest episode of the GT Client Spotlight series. The goal of the series is to highlight our clients who have unique and interesting backgrounds and perspectives, and give them an opportunity to discuss their careers, their lives, as well as things that interest and inspire them. Our esteemed guest today is Mr. Earl Stafford Jr., founder and CEO of Aperio Global, LLC, based in Reston, Virginia. Aperio is at the leading edge of helping federal agencies solve increasingly complex cyber, intelligence, and IT challenges. It was founded in 2019, and Aperio's core capabilities include cyber operations, artificial intelligence, machine learning, software development, and cloud services. Prior to leading Aperio, Earl held positions at LR Associates, the Stafford Foundation, Lockheed Martin, and Universal Systems and Technology, known as Unitech, which I'm sure we'll learn a little more about. Earl was recently recognized as a 2025 Washington 100 Award recipient, which recognizes government and government contracting leaders who are making significant impact within their organizations and sectors. Earl is a graduate of George Mason University with a Bachelor of Science and earned his MBA from Georgetown University. So go Patriots and go Hoyas. Beyond his professional accolades, as the listening audience will soon learn for itself, Earl is a visionary servant leader guided by his principles and his faith. I could say, Earl, it's been a real privilege to work with you and your team over the years, and I'm excited to have you on the pod. So thanks for making time. You're a hard man to catch, so we appreciate it.
Shomari, thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
You bet. So I'll be quiet for a minute, but I'll ask you some questions. So in the course of preparing for this pod, I learned that Aperio is Latin, or to uncover, to explain, and to make clear. I suspect the Latin translation gives us a clue. But Earl, if you don't mind, can you talk about how you guys started in government contracting and what inspired Aperio's founding?
Absolutely. Once again, Shomari, thank you for having me. My career started supporting my father's company in the early 1990s. So my first foray into the government contracting arena was with that company. And over time, I learned quite a bit. I had the privilege of being in what they would call a tooling program, where you go from section to section supporting the government, or not the government, but the company's operation. And I learned quite a bit. I had the privilege of having the tutelage of my father, and that helped shape my desire for the government contracting environment. And a quick side note, I never wanted to be a CEO. As a result of watching my father's journey and the arduous journey and even his success, he successfully exited his company, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. And I saw that journey and I said, that's not for me. But it's interesting when you have certain things ingrained in you, over time, it's part of your destiny. And I feel that Aperio, the naming, the Latin definition, is what Aperio Global is all about. Uncovering and bringing to bear value for our customers.
I love that. And I think we will talk more about your father and his success and what an example he set for you and for all of us, really, because he certainly is a successful example of what entrepreneurs and government contractors can accomplish if done right. And we'll probably get more into it as well. Actually, I'll skip to the next question then. So you and I are fairly rare in that we're second generation government contractors. And so you made a great point. You didn't intend to be CEO. So I saw my father, who had a government contract company, he exited as well. And he kind of pushed me to the legal side of it. I know it has its own headaches, but I did not quite like being in the trenches of being in your position, dealing with a lot of employees and compliance and payroll and everything else that kind of comes along with that. But if you don't mind, to talk about what you did learn from your father, and maybe talk at first about what Unitech was and the role you did there, and then kind of what lessons you took from that experience and you pivoting over toward Aperio.
Sure, absolutely. So what Unitech did, well, we serviced the federal government. There were about 500 people at the time when he exited, 8 offices, and we provided IT services. There was also training and simulation capabilities that were being manufactured and provided for the training arm of the Army. So it was a pretty expansive company with quite a few different capabilities. I myself, I would say probably the highlight of my career was around program management and quality assurance. So I think my father was grooming me without me knowing it to make sure that Aperio, myself, Unitech delivered value, not just provided a service, an empty service, and sometimes, unfortunately, in the federal contracting environment, that happens. But your customer, your mission, your obligation, your commitment is really, at the end of the day, delivering value. And it's almost back to my faith, right? I want to leave every situation better than I found it. So, that's really what the past was. And that's how it feeds into what Aperio is doing now. And what I learned also was to be you all the time through leadership. I will say my definition through my tutelage of leadership is that in times of trouble, a leader is out front. In times of praise and reward, the leader's in the back, right? And that is a way of bracketing how I approach every decision, or I should say, I seek to approach every decision.
I love that. And that comports with my experience as well. Say my dad started his business with two guys and, in a truck, basically we did ship repair work in Norfolk Rum and it kind of grew organically, not to Unitech's scale, but enough where it was successful. We had a guy in Japan, which is pretty cool, and, some other stuff, but also what I took from that, because law is still entrepreneurial. And so lead a team, find practical ways to succeed. A lot of times, and you could probably attest to this, clients don't want to cite regulatory language. You want to provide a business practical work product that allows the client to make an informed business decision. And so my dad used to sit me down and say, okay, I sent a lawyer a question and I got this 8-paragraph treatise on something very esoteric that doesn't help me at all, as opposed to, okay, something very concise. Here's the risk. Here's the highlight. Here's some decisions you can make. Maybe later we could talk through it. And that was like, okay. So I began to learn sort of what a client, because you have a million things going on. I could imagine your day, Earl, or any clients, right? It's like, okay, just tell me the skinny. And I think that entrepreneurial, but also an entrepreneurial background, but having some moral background and having some acumen, I think is critical. And it's certainly translatable for anything, that any profession or career path you kind of go down.
And Shomari, to that point, I would also say I'm fortunate because I still have access to my father every day. So 1, he's my best friend. 2, he is the chief advisor for the company. And 3, not necessarily in that order, he's my father, right? So his perspective is 1, because he's been there. Also because he knows me inside and out. And 3, he knows the challenge. And one of the things that I've taken from him that I engage with my own team is, what's the problem? Let's be clear on what the problem is. Now let's be clear on what the objective is. What are our resources? What is our timeline? And then what is success? And when you can shape things, they might be insurmountable, perceived to be insurmountable. But at the end of the day, you chip away at it. And, your faith, for those that have that same belief, is the guardrail that you don't do anything that would hurt your brand or your reputation. And then your clients have trust and they can depend on that. And that's another value stream all within itself.
Yeah, I love that. And I could attest, and those who know both Earl and his father, they are a dynamic duo, killer combination. So that's you guys are great to work with. So you mentioned Aperio a few times. Let's talk about Aperio, the mission, your value add to the government. So just talk generally about the core mission, business verticals, educate us all.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to say this with all humility. Aperio Global, we are an innovative, growing company that services the federal government, Department of Defense, and soon we expect to be expanding that commercially and internationally. What we bring to the market is expertise and patented capability around cyber, data, and AI. You would look to Imperial Global for difficult data analytic problems, protecting our homeland and critical infrastructure, as well as applying AI driven solutions and capabilities so that we can be productive, protective, as well as impactful at scale.
It's certainly at the leading edge of a lot of what we're hearing about in the news, and great power competition and just sort of harnessing the power of government towards sort of the future. So it's your work and the patent technology is very fascinating. On that point, so as you're doing all these things, how do you define success as a leader, and how do you sort of keep your team focused on the core mission?
Aperio Global by design is focused. And what I mean by that is that there is a unlimited amount of potential when you talk about cyber, data, AI. When we talk about those verticals, Department of War, Department of Defense, federal, international, commercial. So what serves us well, I believe, is that we are able to bring a threaded, integrated solution mindset with focus. So we do not purport to be all things to all people. The segmentation that I like to focus on is those hard problems that have wide implications across those sectors and those lines of effort that I mentioned. It also depends on our strategic alignment. For example, we have a partnership with NVIDIA, which allows us a scaling function when we are talking to prospective mission owners and problem owners. That brings a sense of trust. We have a past history of successful opportunities or successful engagements with certain customers in the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and what have you. We have a building block approach, one that is focused, and we prioritize our objectives so that we don't get caught into the fray of the latest and greatest buzzword.
And that's evident too. Like every interaction I have with you all, it's, staying mission focused, being responsive, nimble. And I have one client who's incredibly accomplished as well. And he's gives great piece of advice. And essentially he said before he even started his business, he spent just a year and a half just thinking about the concept, right? And sort of what are we good at? Because you said you can't chase after everything. And I think from my vantage point as outside counsel, I kind of see when companies kind of go in two different directions, sort of like squirrels chasing nuts, And so one thing that I've done, Earl, and I think you've seen this, is we do small business success panels around either in DC or go out to other cities, but it's a collection of lawyers, accountants, usually business owners as well. And rather than just talk about sort of compliance obligations and the FAR and cost accounting and all that, we talk about how are you successful, in this space. And it's doable, but there are certain things you got to keep in mind. And one of those is sort of just staying focused and knowing what you're good at too. You don't have to be all things to all people. So on that end, again, keeping your CEO hat on and knowing you had this phenomenal mentor in your father, what's some piece of advice that you've gotten either as a leader or leadership, and anything specific in government contracts that has served you well over the years, or what not to do? Sometimes sometimes those are also good pieces of advice, right?
I think that's a two-part answer for me.
Sure.
Based off of my experience. My advisory inputs are also driven because I've seen what the advice is. I've seen it in action. So from my father, it's been have a plan. What is the strategy? Going back to something I said earlier, what is the objective? Being very intentional. And what is value, not for you, but what is value for the customer? Right? What is mission success? what is customer success, and then what the CEO had, what is the organization's success. And they're not always guaranteed to be the same. And then you have to strategize around those three to make sure, first and foremost, that you are bringing value to the customer. So I don't want to be too philosophical in how I'm answering this, but I do know that the audience is going to listen, and I don't want to be so precise because it's not a one size fits all, right? But I am providing the construct of the advice that I've been given, which is why if I were to discuss our strategy now, when I said international and commercial, those are very broad sectors, but they're only being mentioned because of the success and the impact that we're having in the current sectors that we are supporting, right? So there is a plan for expansion. There is a plan for prioritization. There is a plan for strategic alignment. Now, I think it was Mike Tyson, right? The best laid plans, go right out the window after the first hit, right? So then as a CEO, I have to make sure the team as a whole has ensured that there's resiliency within that plan. So when you talk about the roadshow that you successfully do, it's not just the C-suite that makes a plan come to life, right? It is the environment. It is that first tier of defense. It's the legal defense. It's the accounting defense. It's all of that together. So like I said, I don't want to be too philosophical, but there are major parts to one precise objective.
I think you nailed it. And to your point, you have to be intentional and you can't just trip into anything. So small example, going into a market like Texas is very different than going to a market like California. There's no problem or anything with either, but just know there's different markets. There's different regulatory schemes. There's different geography. There's different ever. And same thing with Europe. And what you don't want to have happen is you get tripped up or chasing after something that could have been preventable early on. And that's just on the regulatory side. That's not to mention anything else from marketing to whatever else that may come. So I think that's so critical. And my vantage point again is I typically see when things go wrong, I wholly endorse that view. And so as you're entering the commercial space, entering the international market, and some clients who have been successful in the commercial side go to government, not recognizing everything. And you know this because you're coming from the government contracting side, heavily regulated, heavily high barrier of entry. Yeah, that's really tough to make inroads, but you have to be very intelligent how you begin to market into what agency you market, because the DoD market is very different than a NIH, market.
Exactly.
Yeah, the government's not a monolith.
And I would add this, that the timing and tempo is different. International means you need to travel, right? You need to understand in-country norms, right? Commercial vernacular is different, right?
Yep.
Far, they don't care about the far, right? So as you build up a value proposition for the federal government, that's not a lift and shift. You have to take the core components and change your vernacular, change your timing, and talk about impact. Commercial is like, well, where's the impact?
Yeah.
Right. What's my level of probability? What's the so what? They don't put out RFPs and RFIs commercially. It's just going back to the word, what is the plan? What is the strategy? Should you be doing that? And lastly, I'm a little too verbose, is that even your organizational structure is different. Someone who is federally minded may not be the right person for a commercially driven opportunity. So do you segment that? Do you have divisions? And it's a healthy challenge. It's a healthy challenge.
Yeah. And that dovetails so nicely, squarely into my next question. But you have a phenomenal team. Every time I talk to a member of Aperio's, they're dynamic, intelligent, engaged. But I'm learning this myself. Sometimes you have to find what people are good at. And in my profession, it's just transactional work, litigation work. Some people are good in court. Some people are better behind the scenes. Some people prefer writing. Some people prefer going in front of audiences and different dynamics within government contracts. So long way of saying, how do you identify talent within Aperio and how do you keep that culture of curiosity and engagement going where you're problem solving for your customers, but it could be government, commercial, what have you, but how do you say, okay, this person in Aperio, you need to, this may be something that he or she will thrive in, but how do you go about doing that?
So now you want me to be a little psychoanalytical, right? And share how I approach it. And I would dare say I approach it in a systematic way, which is just a list of a few questions. So if I was having that conversation with you, Shomari, I don't need you to answer these questions. I would say, what is it that you want to do? Not at Aperio, but in life. I would say, who is Shomari? Not at Aperio, but outside of Aperio. How can we align those passions and those proclivities within Aperio? Then there's a next question. What do you want to do? What do you believe that you are good at? And then I may give my own perspective of that. And then the objective, going back to that plan and strategy, the objective is proper alignment. So I like to say a goal within Aperio Global is to align passion and purpose. So it's a systematic approach. It does not always work, but at the same time, when people are doing what they're passionate about, they're not struggling to get out of bed in the morning. They're not struggling with the sweat equity that is required for a growing, innovative company that has global appeal. And it is something where I tell people, do not come to Aperio Global for a job. Come here for a career, a journey, and impact. And if you can't do those last three, then Aperio Global is not the right place for you. And that is okay. And let's talk about that up front.
I love that. And if it's not evident, I like what I do. I know it's meaningful, it's impactful. And I learned something similar. There are sort of get two jobs and have two jobs and make sure you're in one of those where you get to do this. And so I think helping small businesses, helping better known, women owned, small business generally, it's fun for me. And it's sort of fun to watch the companies grow, mature. At some point, some people want to sit on the beach. We do the exit sort of it as well. And maybe they get tired of them sitting on the beach for a couple of years and they come back and say, okay, I'm ready to hit something else. To your point, it's all about identifying talent, identifying passion. And so you have a group of invested people who you enjoy working with and working toward the same mission. So I love that. And that philosophy, Earl, I could tell that drives why Aperio is such a dynamic company that you've built. So, all right, I'm going to stop picking your brain about CEO stuff. Let's talk about the future. All right, I'm not sure that's any easier, but you're probably the best person or one of the best people to talk about this. And full disclosure, I'm a history major from the early aughts, and so all my core knowledge is probably pretty dated. But because you touch on your Aperio, I should say, is focused on these really dynamic areas. I'm curious what you see as sort of the latest breakthroughs in our society, either from AI or data analytics, even in the past sort of 10 years. So I guess just from your vantage point, maybe from when you started with your father's company to now, like what are you seeing in the market and what can we expect in the future? Especially you mentioned NVIDIA. They're certainly, I think the first $5 trillion market cap, so great partnership. But yeah, talk more about that. Love to hear more.
With you being a historian of sorts, I'm going to go back. So when I started in the workplace, there were rules, regulations, SOPs. It was clear on how to do just about everything. And now I'm going to jump to present day. Things where technology can do things faster, potentially more accurately than what a human could, are evaporating based on the technology. I am not one to say that AI per se is taking jobs. I am going to side with what NVIDIA says. They said that you're not going to lose your job to AI. An individual today might lose their job to someone who's using AI. So I think that society is already in large parts using AI enablement, but they may not recognize it. One thing that humans will never lose is the ability of critical thought. So what I'm seeing today is how do you use the momentum of technology so that we as individuals, we as organizations, nations, what have you, are more productive. That is the objective. Where I see the future going, and it's already here in some nascent way, is more so robotics. I also pay attention, and I'm going to go back to my educational foundation of economics, is I pay attention to how much do we trust technology? How much should we trust it? How much are we inherently are trusting it? Because the age of robotics is another layer of trust. The age of automation, autonomous vehicles, robotics, the digital battlefield, space exploration, where technology might be able to go further distances than a human could go for health and protective reasons. It's that question of, what are we ready for? And I fear I'm being too philosophical in this answer, but I think if I'm anything else, it's too prescriptive, like I control the future. I am riding this wave as an organization, looking at how we help society, how we help the warfighter, how we help explore the space domain, how we bring capabilities at scale. And this is a grouping of thought leaders that is doing this in this organization. But societal wise, we need to do the same to the best of our ability.
Yeah, one always has to keep their skill set up. And I agree, there's value add proposition there. Then some of it, I think we're recognizing, and others we still have yet to recognize, right? I was fortunate, Earl, to meet one of our senior chairmen at GT. So GT is founded as a Miami firm in 1967, and it's grown organically in the past, 70 odd years. It's had our 51st office open. So it's a pretty cool story. And the Cesar Alvarez is the senior chairman. He sort of helped grow the firm from South Florida to where it is now. And he mentioned when he began his law practice some time ago, when a client had a question, they wrote the question down, folded an envelope, and mailed it to him. And then the lawyer gets it in the mail a couple of days later and looks at it and say, well, let me go to the law library, and you sort of pick out the research and you write the memo and you mail it and you send it back, And I was thinking about that in a way, because the type of resources in law that I was trained on are evolving. Because I never did generally, and knew it in the early 2000s, we had a lot of electronic legal research. But even then, it's sort of evolving how we go about being more efficient, more precise, and can be disruptive, but it can also be an added tool as well. So I was sort of thinking just from probably from a historian view, how you go from the 70s, where you kind of are practicing law based on generally, it's not be too imprecise, but mailing envelopes back and forth for some time. And now we're redlining and emailing and doing all this stuff. And who knows what it'll sort of be in the future. But I think the relationships are important. You said trust is certainly important, and being able to amplify, I think, human productivity in a unique way. And I think for your purposes too, what you're talking about is even more important, because it's really talking about national security and public service, particularly for those on the front lines as a warfighter. And so, yeah, this is the big question. Not sure you have a precise answer, but what is the progress of AI, and where do you kind of see it going the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? If you can answer that, what are the cool things you're seeing on the front lines that we're probably not seeing at this point from the general public?
What I'm seeing is an ability to process enormous amounts of data in milliseconds with a very high probability for our decision making. And from a national security perspective, that is a premier objective. From a societal perspective, the same, right? The amounts of data that we have to sift through. If you receive text messages on your phone, how many of those messages are value added to you over the course of a day? It's familiar to when I was growing up and the phone would ring and it would be an advertiser or a marketer, and your parent would be on the phone and say, I don't have time for this call, right? I'm cooking dinner or something, right? So we have so much data that is amassing around us, and the criticality of our decisions are even more these days. So that's where I see one thing with technology, AI. I think the security of our data, of that construct of our decision making, quantum speed, quantum security, those things are coming online as we speak. The expansiveness of another domain. 20 years ago, you and I had no business talking about the space domain, but now a day without space is a bad day completely. from our farming to our navigation to internet providers and what have you. I see this multimodal integration. And as individuals, as humans, we are more focused on the intent of our objectives than we are of the task of our objectives, right? So with the extension of technology, it's I intend to build a website. And the technology is there that you can build a website within 15 minutes instead of going and taking a class for 6 months, reading a 500-page book as a reference. Now you have an extension. So that productivity that I spoke about earlier is here, and the technology is not slowing down.
You mentioned what text messages are important to us as in a daily back and forth. I guess we could both say the ones from our wives are important. So we'll stipulate to that, right? But otherwise, yes. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Those messages are of critical mass.
Yes, exactly. We'll keep all those. Last question, Earl, and you and I both have young kids. And so I'm just curious, have you given any thought to what your son and what my daughter will kind of see in their future in terms of work? And maybe I'll even borrow some lessons from you as I'm sure you're incorporating some of these lessons and discoveries and hey, is this something that he'll probably be saying? And so I'm just I was kind of curious about that, given the breakneck development that we're seeing a lot, even over the past, goodness, I didn't know what a Zoom or a Teams meeting was at the pandemic. And then, it kind of came up one day. I was like, oh, this is neat, whatever this is. And the rest is history. But yeah, I'm just curious if you've given that any kind of thought and went and bold predictions. And
I think about that every day. My wife and I talk about it quite often because when you have children who are digital natives, when I talked about the amount of data and information that is flowing, correct information, disinformation, misinformation, you have to stand guard to the new generations because they're in the midst of it. And it is very difficult to guard them about what information they see when they see it. When we were growing up, it was easier. You really had to go look to find information that was ahead of your time. And nowadays you can pick up your phone and iPad and you can stumble upon it. And there are parts of society that don't look to edify children. They look to take advantage of them. And as parents, it is daunting. Not impossible, rely on my faith, my wife and I, but nonetheless, you put up the guardrails, right? And you really focus on teaching a digital native how to navigate this enormous sector of information and access.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm sure you'll agree with this as well. They're very bright and it's amazing. Even they impress us daily, right? In terms of what they could do and manipulate. And
I must say, our son walks around talking in Portuguese and some other foreign languages. And, we're like, how did you learn that? Well, because he was learning his numbers and letters and phrases and he's just picked it up. So there definitely are positives, but there are definitely challenges.
Well, that will close it out. Earl, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, wisdom, and your time. Most importantly, I know the audience took away a lot. So again, we appreciate it and continued success as well.
Shomari, thank you once again for having me on. It is an extreme honor. And I would say in business, it takes a village. And we are so thankful that you and GT Law are part of our village.